Jasmine, I don't need a I just know it's you. Will you marry me?
Yes. Yes, Marcus!
She was standing at the altar in a dress that cost more than most people earn in a year. The flowers were fresh. The guests were seated. The photographer was ready. And somewhere in the back of that church, a woman was praying, not for the bride's happiness, but for her complete and total destruction. This is not a fairy tale. This is a story about what jealousy looks like when it wears a smile, sits at your dinner table, and calls itself family. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Jasmine Whitfield made his money the hard way. He grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Memphis, Tennessee, sharing a bed with his younger brother, wearing the same pair of sneakers for 2 school years in a row because his mother simply could not afford another pair. But Jasmine had something that no amount of poverty could take away from him, a mind that never stopped working and a hunger that never stopped burning. By the time he was 32, he had built a small logistics company out of a rented garage. By 40, that company had grown into a freight and supply chain empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Jasmine Whitfield became one of the most respected self-made businessmen in the South. He was the kind of man other men pointed to when they needed proof that the American dream was still real. His first wife, Denise, was his everything. They had met in college, survived broke years together, celebrated breakthroughs together, and built their life from scratch side by side. Denise was gentle, sharp-minded, and deeply loved. She was the kind of woman who remembered every small thing, the way her daughter liked her eggs in the morning, the birthday of every employee in Jasmine's office, the exact words to say when someone was falling apart. She was the glue. When Denise passed away from ovarian cancer in the spring, just 2 years after Jasmine crossed his first 100 million, it broke him in ways that money could not fix. He was 51 years old and suddenly very, very alone. Their daughter, Jasmine, was 24 at the time. She had just started her MBA. She held her father's hand at the funeral and promised her mother, under her breath, that she would take care of him. And she did. For 2 years, Jasmine was everything. She called every day. She came home most weekends. She even started working part-time inside her father's company to stay close. She was not just his daughter, she was his anchor. People who knew Jasmine during that period said he was a broken man slowly being rebuilt, piece by piece, by the love of his child. Now, ask yourself this. Have you ever watched someone who meant the world to you slowly drift away, and felt completely powerless to stop it? Because that is what happened next, and it happened quietly, the way the worst things always do. Her name was Vivian Cross. She was 43 years old, twice divorced, and extraordinarily beautiful in a way that announced itself before she even walked into a room. She had long dark hair, a sharp wit, and a talent for making powerful men feel understood. She met Jasmine at a charity gala in Nashville 18 months after Denise passed. She laughed at his jokes. She asked about his business with genuine-sounding curiosity. She wore a black dress and spoke softly, and Jasmine, a grieving man who had spent 18 months being strong for everyone else, finally felt like someone was paying attention to him. They exchanged numbers that night. 6 months later, Jasmine proposed. Jasmine was not there when it happened. She found out through a phone call. Jasmine's voice was full of excitement. Jasmine's heart sank straight to the floor, but she said the right words. "I just want you to be happy, Dad." She swallowed the rest. The wedding between Jasmine and Vivian was quiet and small, as Jasmine had requested out of respect for Denise's memory. Vivian had agreed publicly. Privately, Vivian had requested a honeymoon in Tuscany, a new car, and a redecorating of the entire main house. Jasmine, still glowing with new love, said yes to everything. Jasmine came home for the wedding, stood beside her father, smiled in the photographs, and drove back to her apartment that same evening without eating at the reception. Her best friend, Keisha, texted her on the drive home. Keisha wrote, "You okay?" And Jasmine stared at that message at a red light for a long time before she typed back, "I don't know yet." The first sign that something was wrong came 3 months into the marriage. Vivian started calling Jasmine's office directly, not to speak to him, but to ask the assistant which meetings Jasmine had attended and what projects she had been involved in. At first, the assistant thought nothing of it. But it happened again. And again. Then Vivian began mentioning Jasmine in conversations with Raymond in a particular way, not openly critical, but loaded. Your daughter seems to have a lot of strong opinions about the business. And I just want to make sure Jasmine respects boundaries now that things have changed at home. Raymond would nod quietly, unsure what to say. He loved them both, and loving them both was starting to feel like standing with one foot on each side of a crack in the earth. Vivian had no children of her own. She had wanted them, had tried for them, and somewhere in the gap between the life she had planned and the life she had ended up with, something had cuddled. She had married Raymond for love, or something that felt close enough to it. But she had not anticipated how completely Jasmine would occupy the emotional center of Raymond's world. She had not anticipated the way Raymond's eyes softened when Jasmine called. She had not anticipated that Raymond's first instinct in any major decision was still to say, "Let me talk to Jasmine first." Vivian had married a billionaire. What she had not bargained for was that the billionaire's heart already had a permanent resident. Think about this for a second. How many families have been torn apart not by hatred, but by jealousy? Not because someone was evil from the beginning, but because they felt invisible inside a house they were supposed to belong to. 2 years into the marriage, Jasmine met a man named Marcus Coleman. Marcus was a civil engineer from Atlanta, calm, steady, and quietly brilliant. He had grown up middle class, had no interest in Raymond's money, and was the kind of man who showed up exactly when he said he would and meant exactly what he said. Jasmine had been wary of relationships for a long time. She was beautiful and her father was rich, which meant every man she dated came with a question she couldn't always answer. Does he want me, or does he want what I represent? Marcus was different. He had never once asked about Raymond's net worth. He had brought Jasmine soup when she was sick before he ever met her father. He had fallen for her laugh first, her mind second, and the rest came after. Within 18 months, Marcus proposed under a streetlight in Atlanta, just the two of them, no cameras, no grand gestures, just a small box and a question and Jasmine saying yes so fast she barely let him finish the sentence. Raymond cried when Jasmine told him. He hugged her for a long time and whispered that her mother would have loved Marcus. Jasmine cried too. It was one of the most beautiful moments in her adult life. Vivian smiled at the dinner table when they announced it. She raised her glass. She said, "This calls for a toast." But underneath the table, her fingers were pressed so tightly into her palm that her knuckles had turned white. The wedding planning began. Raymond offered to pay for everything, the venue, the flowers, the catering, the dress, the honeymoon. He told Jasmine, "Your mother always said your wedding day would be the most beautiful day of your life. I intend to make sure she was right." The venue was a historic estate outside Nashville. 500 guests. 3-tier cake. An orchestra for the reception. Jasmine threw herself into every detail with the kind of joy she hadn't felt in years. She picked out flowers that her mother used to grow in the garden, white peonies and pale lilac. She found a dress that made her feel like herself and something more at the same time. She was finally, deeply, genuinely happy. And that happiness, that pure, uncomplicated happiness, was the thing Vivian could not tolerate. It started with small interference. Vivian told the event planner, privately, that Jasmine had changed her mind about the orchid centerpieces and wanted roses instead. The planner called Jasmine to confirm. Jasmine was confused. She had never said that. When she brought it up at dinner, Vivian laughed it off. "Oh, I must have misunderstood, darling. My mistake." Raymond said nothing. Jasmine said nothing more. But she stored that moment somewhere quiet inside herself. Then Vivian began feeding Raymond slow, steady doubts about Marcus. Nothing direct, never direct. She would mention that she had heard Marcus's former business partner had filed a complaint against him. She would wonder out loud, with her brow furrowed, whether a civil engineer's salary was truly compatible with the lifestyle Jasmine was accustomed to. She told Raymond, "I just want to make sure your daughter is protected." Raymond began asking Marcus harder questions at family dinners. Marcus answered them all calmly because he had nothing to hide, but Jasmine noticed the shift. She noticed the way her father's warmth was cooling by degrees, like a room where someone had quietly turned down the heat. 6 weeks before the wedding, the thing Vivian had been building toward finally arrived. She had found something, or she believed she had. Vivian came to Raymond one evening while Jasmine was out and sat across from him with a folder in her hand. Inside the folder was a printed document, what appeared to be a financial record, suggesting that Marcus had been involved in a fraud case years earlier in Georgia. The document looked official. The numbers looked real. Vivian placed it on the table slowly, the way someone delivers news they have rehearsed. She said, "I didn't want to show you this. I really didn't. But I would never forgive myself if something happened to Jasmine." Raymond stared at the document for a long time. His jaw tightened. The lines around his eyes deepened. He had built his entire empire on trust and integrity, and the idea that his daughter might be walking into something he hadn't protected her from was more than he could absorb. He called Jasmine that night. He told her to come home. His voice was low and measured in the way it only got when something serious had happened. Jasmine drove the 2 hours home that same night with her heart pounding the whole way. She walked into the house and saw the folder on the kitchen table. She saw her father's face. And then she saw Vivian, seated on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, wearing an expression that was trying very hard to look like concern. Jasmine picked up the document. She read it. She read it a second time. Her hands were steady but her voice, when she finally spoke, was very quiet. She said, "Dad, this document is fake." Raymond looked at her. Jasmine said, "I know it's fake because I personally researched Marcus's background before I said yes. I hired an attorney. I have the real records. This document has the wrong case number format for Georgia State Court, and the date on it corresponds to a period when Marcus was living in Ohio, not Georgia. I can show you everything." She pulled out her phone and began showing him, document by document, everything she had verified 18 months ago when she decided Marcus was the man she would spend her life with. She had done the work. She had loved carefully as well as fully. Raymond looked at the folder. Then he looked at his daughter. Then, slowly, he turned to look at Vivian. Vivian did not fall apart the way guilty people do in the movies. She sat very still. She said she had found the document online and had believed it to be legitimate. She said she was just trying to protect the family. Her voice did not shake. Her eyes did not water. But Raymond was no longer looking at her the way a husband looks at a wife. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has finally understood. He asked her to leave the room. She did. He sat with Jasmine for the next 2 hours. They talked the way they used to talk before Vivian, the way they had talked in the months after Denise passed, honestly, completely, without performance. Jasmine did not rage. She did not demand that her father choose. She simply laid out, quietly and clearly, everything she had noticed over the past 2 years, the event planner incident, the questions planted at dinner, the small erosions that had added up. Raymond listened. He was a man who had negotiated billion-dollar contracts and read people for 30 years. He understood, sitting in that kitchen, that he had missed something enormous. And that it had happened because grief had made him want so badly to believe in something new that he had stopped paying attention to what was real. The days that followed were difficult in ways that Raymond had not expected. He loved Vivian, or had loved her, or had loved the version of her that had seemed possible at that Nashville gala. But love, he had learned a long time ago, had to share space with truth. He had a long and private conversation with Vivian. He did not make accusations. He asked questions. And in the asking, the picture became clear enough. Vivian left the house 3 weeks before the wedding. There was no public announcement. There was no dramatic scene. Raymond simply told close family members that the marriage had not worked out, and left it at that. What came next, very few people expected. Raymond walked his daughter down the aisle on a Saturday in late October. The estate outside Nashville was lit with warm light, and white peonies were everywhere, the same flowers Denise used to grow. The orchestra played. 500 people rose as Jasmine appeared at the end of the aisle in her dress, and the photograph taken at that exact moment, the one of Raymond's face when he first saw her, became the image her wedding photographer later said was the most beautiful thing he had ever captured in 20 years of weddings. It was a father looking at his daughter the way a man looks when he knows he almost lost something and did not. Marcus stood at the altar with calm and steady eyes. When Jasmine reached him, he took her hand and held it the way he had always held it, like it mattered, like it was something he had chosen and would keep choosing. They exchanged vows they had written themselves. Jasmine's voice broke only once, when she said, "I want to build a life that my mother would be proud to witness." Raymond, in the front row, lowered his head. He was smiling and crying at the same time. And somewhere in that complicated expression was everything, grief and gratitude and the specific relief of a man who had nearly made a terrible mistake and had pulled himself back from the edge just in time. Now here is what I want you to sit with. Think about the Jasmines in your life, the people who love you so completely that they do the quiet, invisible work of protecting you before you even know you need protecting. Think about how easy it is, in our loneliness, in our grief, in our hunger for something new, to slowly turn away from the people who have always been there. And think about Vivian, not with contempt, but with the kind of honest reflection that the best stories ask of us. Because jealousy rarely announces itself. It comes wearing concern. It comes holding a folder. It comes sitting on a couch with its hands folded in its lap, telling you it only wants what is best for you. How many times have you let someone use your love against you? How many times has someone slowly, quietly, turned your closest relationships cold, and you didn't notice until something almost broke? If Jasmine had not done the work of loving carefully, if she had not had the presence of mind to verify and document and hold her ground without rage, that wedding might never have happened. The flowers might never have been white peonies. Raymond might never have walked her down that aisle. One woman's quiet, calculated jealousy came within 6 weeks of erasing the most important day of another woman's life. What would you have done, sitting in Jasmine's seat? What would you have done in Raymond's? And what does it say about all of us that it took a forged document for the truth to finally come out? The wedding was real. The love was real. And in the end, the truth was real too. That is not always the case. But on that Saturday in October, under warm lights and white peonies, it was. And that is enough.